The scorching summer sun cast long shadows across Yerington, Nevada, as Penelope Davies clutched her travel bag tighter, watching dust devils dance through the main street. At 30 years of age, she had arrived in this frontier town with nothing but determination, and the deed to her late uncle's abandoned millinery shop, a final chance to build a life for herself after years of disappointment back east. The stagecoach that had delivered her to this remote corner of Nevada territory in 1876 rattled away, leaving Penelope alone on the wooden boardwalk. Her honey-brown hair was pinned neatly beneath a modest hat, her traveling dress wrinkled from the 3-day journey. The weight of her decision pressed upon her shoulders as heavily as the desert heat. "You must be the newcomer," a voice called out. Penelope turned to see a robust woman with gray-streaked hair approaching. "Martha Wilson, I own the general store. Your uncle wrote to tell us you'd be coming." Her eyes traveled over Penelope with undisguised assessment. "Didn't mention you'd be. Well, a woman of your years. Most ladies out here are either young brides or widows by 30. Penelope forced a smile, already familiar with such observations. "How fortunate that I'm neither then." "I'm Penelope Davies, pleased to make your acquaintance." Martha's lips pursed. "The millinery shop hasn't been open in nearly 2 years. It'll need considerable work. Are you certain you're up to such a task? At your age, might be better to seek a position as a housekeeper or such." "I managed my father's hat shop in Boston for 12 years before his passing," Penelope replied evenly, though her heart sank at the woman's dismissive tone. "I believe I'm quite capable of restoring one here." "If you say so," Martha shrugged. "Town's small, but we've got our share of ladies who like fine things, though they might prefer fresher ideas than what's fashionable for women of your maturity." Before Penelope could respond, the batwing doors of the Rusty Nail Saloon swung open and a tall man emerged. Even at a distance, he commanded attention, broad-shouldered and lean-hipped in dusty riding clothes, a well-worn Stetson shadowing his face. He crossed the street toward them with confident, easy strides. "Mrs. Wilson." He nodded politely to Martha before turning curious eyes to Penelope. "You must be Samuel's niece." "Vincent Evans," Martha explained to Penelope. "Owns the largest cattle spread north of town. This is Miss Davies, come to reopen her uncle's shop." Vincent Evans removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked dark hair and striking blue eyes in a face weathered by years under the western sky. He extended a hand. "Welcome to Yerington, Miss Davies." Penelope accepted his handshake, noting the calluses on his palm and the strength in his grip. "Thank you, Mr. Evans." Martha couldn't help adding, "Miss Davies here is 30. Come west seeking opportunity rather late, I'd say." Vincent's eyes never left Penelope's face, his expression thoughtful rather than judgmental. "Seems to me, Mrs. Wilson, that 30 is merely the beginning. A woman in the prime of her beauty and intelligence, with experience enough to know her own mind." His smile deepened, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "I'd say Yerington is fortunate to have attracted such a promising new resident." Penelope felt warmth rise to her cheeks, both from the unexpected compliment and the intensity of his gaze. For the first time since stepping off the stagecoach, she felt a flutter of hope. "Well," Martha huffed, clearly surprised by Vincent's reaction, "I should get back to my store." "Miss Davies, your uncle's place is down at the end of the street. Keys were left with Sheriff Collins. His office is just there." She pointed toward a small building with a wooden star hanging above the door. As Martha departed, Vincent retrieved Penelope's bag before she could protest. "Allow me to escort you to the sheriff's office, Miss Davies. Then perhaps I might show you to your uncle's place. It's been vacant a while, might need a man's hand for some repairs." "That's very kind, Mr. Evans, but I wouldn't want to impose on your time." No imposition at all. I've always had a fondness for Samuel. Fine man, your uncle. I was sorry to hear of his passing. They walked side by side down the dusty main street, Penelope acutely aware of the curious glances from townspeople. Vincent nodded greetings to several as they passed. "I should warn you," he said quietly. "Yerington can be set in its ways. Folk here aren't used to independent women, especially those who arrive without husbands or fathers. I'm quite accustomed to defying expectations, Mr. Evans. I don't doubt that for a moment." The corner of his mouth lifted. But a friendly word of caution. Martha Wilson considers herself the town's moral compass. Her opinion carries weight. "And what of your opinion, Mr. Evans? Does it carry weight as well?" Vincent chuckled, a rich sound that made Penelope's heart skip unexpectedly. "Among some, perhaps. I try to reserve judgment until I know a person's character. Far more revealing than their age or circumstances. Don't you agree?" At the sheriff's office, they found a lanky man with a salt and pepper mustache sorting through wanted posters. He introduced himself as Sheriff Thomas Collins, an old friend of her uncle's. "Miss Davies, welcome to Yerington." He rummaged through his desk drawer and produced a large iron key. "Your uncle's place has been kept locked up tight, but I'm afraid it's gathered quite a bit of dust. Roof sound, though." "Thank you, Sheriff. I appreciate your looking after it." "Evans," the sheriff nodded to Vincent. "Surprised to see you in town midweek. Trouble at the ranch." "Nothing serious. Came in for supplies and to speak with the bank about expanding the north pasture." Vincent turned to Penelope. "If you're ready, Miss Davies, I'd be happy to continue our escort." The millinery shop stood at the quiet end of Main Street, a modest storefront with faded lettering on the window. "Davies' Fine Millinery." A thick layer of dust coated the display area, and when Penelope unlocked the door, the musty scent of long-closed spaces greeted them. The interior was dark until Vincent opened the shutters, allowing sunlight to illuminate the space. The front room held empty display cases and several headless mannequins. Beyond a curtained doorway, Penelope discovered a workroom with shelves of hat blocks, rolls of ribbon, and supplies all covered in dust, but otherwise undisturbed. A narrow staircase led to a small apartment above the shop. "It's perfect," Penelope whispered, running her fingers along a wooden hat stand. "Perfect might be overstating things," Vincent said with a smile, "but nothing a good cleaning won't improve." Penelope turned to him, suddenly realizing how much of his day she had claimed. "Mr. Evans, I can't thank you enough for your kindness, but I've taken far too much of your time already." "Time well spent, Miss Davies." He replaced his hat and moved toward the door. "I'd be happy to send one of my ranch hands to help with any repairs you might need." "That's very generous, but I've managed on my own for many years. I'm quite capable." "I don't doubt your capability," he said, his blue eyes crinkling at the corners. "But even the most capable people sometimes benefit from a helping hand." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a calling card. "My ranch is about 5 miles north. If you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to send word." After Vincent departed, Penelope explored her new home more thoroughly. The living quarters were small but adequate: a bedroom, a modest sitting room with a small stove, and a tiny kitchen area. Her uncle had left some furniture, basic but serviceable. Standing by the bedroom window that overlooked the quiet back street of Yerington, Penelope felt a complex mix of emotions. Hope mingled with uncertainty, determination with fear. At 30, she had abandoned everything familiar to start anew in this dusty frontier town. Already she had encountered the prejudice. She'd hoped to escape the judgment in Martha Wilson's eyes was all too familiar. Yet Vincent Evans' unexpected defense lingered in her mind. "A woman in the prime of her beauty and intelligence," he had said, without mockery or condescension. In Boston, men had either pursued her desperately when she was younger or dismissed her entirely as she approached 30. None had looked at her the way Vincent had, as if she were a person of value, regardless of her age or marital status. Penelope unpacked her small trunk, hanging her dresses carefully to remove the wrinkles. She changed into a simpler dress and pinned her hair back more practically. There was cleaning to be done before nightfall if she wanted to sleep without dust for company. As she worked, sweeping and dusting the shop floor, Penelope planned her approach to reopening the millinery. She would need to assess the remaining inventory, order new materials, and make some sample hats to display. She'd need to introduce herself to the women of Yerington, understand their tastes and needs. A knock at the shop door interrupted her thoughts. Expecting perhaps Sheriff Collins checking on her, Penelope was surprised to find a young woman of perhaps 22 standing on the boardwalk, clutching a covered basket. "Miss Davies, I'm Rebecca Turner. My father runs the bank. Mrs. Wilson mentioned you'd arrived, and I thought you might appreciate a hot meal after your journey." She lifted the basket slightly. "It's nothing fancy, just chicken stew and some fresh bread." "That's incredibly thoughtful." Penelope opened the door wider. "Please come in." "I'm afraid I haven't much to offer in the way of comfort yet, but there's a table in back we could use." Rebecca followed her through the shop, her curious eyes taking in everything. "I remember coming here with my mother when your uncle ran the shop. He made the loveliest bonnets." They sat at a small table in the workroom, and Rebecca unpacked her basket, a container of still warm stew, a loaf of bread, some butter, and 2 slices of apple pie. "I hope you don't mind my presumption," Rebecca said as they ate, "but new arrivals are rare in Yerington, especially women on their own." "It's a wonderful kindness," Penelope assured her. "I confess I hadn't thought about supper arrangements yet. There's a small cafe that serves decent meals, or Mrs. Peterson takes in boarders and provides meals for an extra charge." Rebecca hesitated. "I should warn you, though Mrs. Wilson has already been sharing her impressions of you with anyone who'll listen." Penelope sighed. "Let me guess, she finds it peculiar that an unmarried woman of 30 would move west to run a business alone." "Something like that." Rebecca looked embarrassed. "It's just her way. She did the same when Dr. Richards arrived with his sister as his nurse instead of a wife. Eventually, she found someone else to disapprove of." "And what do you think, Miss Turner? Is it so strange for a woman my age to seek independence?" Rebecca's eyes lit up. "I think it's wonderful. I've been trying to convince my father to let me work in the bank instead of just waiting around for a suitable marriage proposal." She leaned forward eagerly. "Is it true you ran your father's shop in Boston? What was it like? Were you completely in charge?" Penelope found herself warming to the young woman's enthusiasm. For the next hour, they chatted companionably about Boston, hat-making, and Rebecca's ambitions to be more than just someone's wife. "Oh," Rebecca exclaimed suddenly, "I nearly forgot to mention we're having a social at the church on Sunday after services. It would be a perfect opportunity for you to meet everyone." Her expression turned mischievous. "And I couldn't help but notice Mr. Evans escorting you earlier. He rarely comes to town socials, too busy with his ranch, he says, but perhaps he might make an exception this time." Penelope felt a ridiculous flutter at the mention of Vincent Evans. "I'm sure Mr. Evans was simply being neighborly to a newcomer." Rebecca's smile suggested she thought otherwise. "Mr. Evans has a reputation for being polite but reserved. I've never seen him personally escort anyone around town before. Half the unmarried women in the county have set their caps for him since his wife died 5 years ago, but he's shown no interest." his wife?" Penelope asked before she could stop herself. "Caroline Evans. She died in childbirth along with their baby. It was before my family moved here, but everyone says he was devastated, threw himself into expanding his ranch, and rarely socializes beyond necessary business." Rebecca gathered her things, preparing to leave. "That's why it caused such a stir when Mrs. Wilson told everyone at the general store that he'd called you a woman in her prime, and seemed quite taken with you." After Rebecca left, Penelope continued cleaning, her mind churning with this new information. She had no business feeling anything about Vincent Evans' past or his possible interest in her. She had come to Yerington to build a business and a life independent of any man's approval or protection. And yet, as she prepared for bed in her newly cleaned quarters, Penelope couldn't help but recall the warmth in Vincent's blue eyes, the unexpected defense of her age, the offered assistance with no apparent expectation of return. It had been a long time since anyone had looked at her and seen potential instead of diminishing value. The next morning, Penelope awoke with the sunrise, eager to begin transforming the shop. She brewed coffee on the small stove and ate some bread and preserves Rebecca had left. She had just begun removing hat forms from storage when the shop bell jingled. Sheriff Collins stood in the doorway, hat in hand. "Morning, Miss Davies. Thought I'd check in, see how you're settling." "Very well, thank you. Everyone's been most kind." The sheriff nodded, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Glad to hear it. Listen, there's something you should know. Your uncle, he wasn't just a hat maker. He was also the town's unofficial money lender." Penelope froze. "I beg your pardon. Nothing illegal, mind you. Banks too conservative with loans, so folks who needed funds sometimes came to Samuel. He kept meticulous records." Sheriff Collins pulled a small leather-bound ledger from his pocket. "Found this in his desk at my office. He'd left it for safekeeping before heading east." "Thought you ought to have it." Penelope accepted the book with uncertainty. "I had no idea. My uncle's letters mentioned only the millinery. Samuel was a private man, but fair. Some of these loans are still outstanding, smaller ones mostly. Folks been making payments to me, and I've been holding the funds for when his estate was settled." He produced an envelope. "This here's what's been collected so far, just over $200. Stunned, Penelope took the envelope. "I don't know what to say. No need to decide anything today. Just thought you should know." The sheriff adjusted his hat. "Also, Vincent Evans stopped by my office this morning. Asked me to tell you he's sending a couple of men to fix that loose awning and the back door that don't close proper. Said they'd be here around noon if that's agreeable." "That's very thoughtful but unnecessary, Miss Davies," Sheriff Collins interrupted gently. "Folks out here survive by helping each other. Vincent Evans is a good man who respects what your uncle stood for. Let him help." After the sheriff left, Penelope opened the ledger with trembling hands. Inside, in her uncle's neat handwriting, were detailed records of loans amounts, interest terms, payment schedules, and notes about each borrower's circumstances. Some loans had been marked paid in full. Others showed regular payments. A few appeared dormant. One entry caught her eye. Vincent Evans' $500 interest waived for Caroline's medical care. A line had been drawn through it with the notation paid in full June 1872. Penelope closed the book, suddenly understanding Vincent's solicitousness. He had owed her uncle a debt, and now he was transferring that sense of obligation to her. The thought should have been a relief, his kindness explained by simple duty rather than any personal interest, but instead, she felt oddly disappointed. At noon, as promised, 2 ranch hands arrived to repair the awning and fix the back door. They worked efficiently, refusing payment and explaining that boss said to make sure everything's secure before we leave. By mid-afternoon, the shop looked considerably improved, with clean windows, a solid door, and a freshly painted sign that one of the men had touched up unexpectedly. Throughout the following days, Penelope worked tirelessly to prepare the shop for reopening. She sorted through the existing stock, cleaned and repaired salvageable materials, and began crafting several new hats to showcase her skills. Rebecca visited daily, bringing food and town gossip, often staying to help with cleaning or organizing. Through Rebecca, Penelope learned more about Yerington and its residents. The town had grown around silver mining operations in the 1860s, but when those began to play out, cattle ranching became the economic mainstay. Vincent Evans had arrived as a young man with little more than ambition, worked for other ranchers, saved carefully, and eventually purchased land north of town. Through determination and shrewd business sense, he had expanded that initial purchase into one of the region's most successful operations. "They say he works from dawn until dusk," Rebecca told her as they arranged hat displays. "Even with a dozen hired hands, he insists on doing the hardest work himself. Some think he's still punishing himself for not being home when Caroline went into labor. He was in Carson City on business." "That's terribly sad," Penelope said softly, "but surely no one blames him for being away." "No one but himself, from what my father says." Rebecca adjusted a feathered bonnet. "Papa says Mr. Evans withdrew completely after the funeral, focused entirely on building his ranch, as if trying to exhaust himself too much to feel the grief." Penelope found her thoughts returning often to Vincent Evans in the quieter moments of her days. She had seen no sign of him since that first day, though his ranch hands had returned twice more, once to repair a leaking water pump, and again to deliver a stack of wooden crates that might be useful for storage, according to the taciturn cowboy who brought them. By Saturday, the shop was nearly ready for its grand reopening. Penelope had crafted 6 new ladies' hats and 3 gentlemen's, displaying them prominently in the freshly cleaned front window. She had hung a sign announcing Davies' Millinery Grand reopening Tuesday, and placed an advertisement in the weekly Yerington Sentinel. That evening, as she was locking up, she heard the distinctive sound of horseshoes on packed dirt. Turning, she saw Vincent Evans approaching on horseback, his tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. He dismounted smoothly, tying his horse to the hitching post before removing his hat. "Miss Davies, the shop looks remarkable." His eyes took in the transformed storefront. "You've accomplished quite a lot in a short time." "Thank you, Mr. Evans, and thank you for sending your men to help with repairs. It was most generous, though unnecessary." "It was the least I could do." He hesitated slightly. "I've been meaning to call on you properly, but spring calving has kept me at the ranch from dawn till dusk." "I understand you're a busy man, Mr. Evans. There's no need to make special efforts on my account." Penelope spoke more stiffly than she'd intended, the ledger entry still fresh in her mind. Something in her tone made Vincent study her face more carefully. "Have I done something to offend you, Miss Davies?" Penelope hesitated, then decided directness was best. "Sheriff Collins gave me my uncle's ledger. I know about the loan for your wife's care. While I appreciate your sense of obligation to my uncle's memory, please know that any debt between our families is considered fully settled." Vincent's expression changed from confusion to understanding. "You think I've been helping because I felt indebted to your uncle. Isn't that the case?" He shook his head slowly. "Your uncle was a good friend who helped me during the worst time of my life, yes. But my debt to him was repaid years ago financially and in friendship. My assistance to you has nothing to do with obligation, Miss Davies." "Then why?" The question slipped out before she could reconsider. Vincent took a step closer, his blue eyes intent. Because from the moment I saw you standing on that boardwalk, enduring Martha Wilson's thinly veiled insults with grace and dignity, I felt interested, in a way I haven't felt in 5 years. Penelope's heart quickened. Mr. Evans, Vincent, he corrected gently. And I came to town today specifically to ask if you would allow me to escort you to the church social tomorrow. That is. Penelope gathered her composure. That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to start rumors. A hint of a smile touched his lips. I believe that ship has sailed, Miss Davies. According to my foreman, who heard it from the blacksmith, who was told by his wife, who learned it from Mrs. Wilson herself, we are already the subject of considerable speculation. Despite herself, Penelope laughed. Is there anything in this town that remains private? Very little, Vincent admitted. Which is why I'd rather give them something accurate to discuss, rather than conjecture. So may I escort you tomorrow, after services, if you plan to attend? Penelope considered the implications. Being seen publicly with Vincent Evans would certainly cement her place in town gossip. But refusing would do little to quell the talk, and might insult a man who had shown her nothing but kindness. And if she were honest with herself, she wanted to accept. I would be honored, Mr. Evans. Vincent, thank you. His smile broadened, transforming his weathered face. Excellent. Service begins at 10. May I call for you at 9:30? After he departed, Penelope stood on the boardwalk watching his retreating figure, an unfamiliar flutter of anticipation in her chest. At 30, with her dreams of marriage long since set aside in favor of independence, she had never expected to feel such schoolgirl nervousness at the prospect of a social engagement. Sunday morning dawned clear and warm. Penelope dressed with particular care in her best church dress, a navy blue silk with modest bustle and lace trim at the collar. She pinned her hair in a simple but elegant style and topped it with a small hat of her own design, navy blue, felt with a single white feather. Precisely at 9:30, Vincent arrived in a polished buggy drawn by a handsome bay horse. He had traded his usual ranch attire for a well-tailored dark suit, crisp white shirt, and string tie. His hat was newer than the one he typically wore, and he had trimmed his mustache. Miss Davies, he said, helping her into the buggy with a strong, steady hand. You look lovely. Thank you, you're quite presentable yourself, she replied with a small smile. As they drove through town toward the white-steepled church on the edge of Yerington, Penelope was acutely aware of curtains twitching and heads turning. Vincent seemed untroubled by the attention, maintaining an easy conversation about the pleasant weather and the shop's upcoming opening. The small church was nearly full when they arrived. Vincent guided Penelope to a pew near the middle, his hand lightly at the small of her back. As they settled, Penelope could feel the weight of stairs and hear the hushed whispers. Rebecca, seated with her parents across the aisle, caught her eye and smiled encouragingly. Martha Wilson, positioned strategically in the pew ahead, turned to give them a long, assessing look before leaning to whisper something to her husband. The Reverend James Porter, a kindly man in his 50s, welcomed Penelope to the congregation before beginning his sermon. Throughout the service, Penelope was conscious of Vincent beside her, the subtle scent of sandalwood soap, the way his shoulder occasionally brushed hers when he shifted, the deep resonance of his voice during hymns. After services concluded, the congregation moved to the adjacent churchyard, where tables had been set up for the social. Women brought out covered dishes and desserts, while men arranged benches and chairs. Children raced about playing tag in the spring sunshine. Vincent stayed close to Penelope's side as they navigated the crowd, introducing her to those she hadn't yet met. Some greeted her warmly, while others offered the brittle politeness that barely masked their judgment. Vincent Evans, as I live and breathe. A robust man with a sheriff's badge approached. Didn't expect to see you at a social. You usually find an excuse to rush back to that ranch of yours. Sheriff Collins, Vincent nodded, had good reason to attend today. The sheriff's knowing glance between them made Penelope blush slightly. They had just filled plates with food when Martha Wilson approached, accompanied by a young woman with similar features. Mr. Evans, how nice to see you participating in community events again. Martha's smile didn't reach her eyes. Have you met my daughter, Clara? She's just returned from finishing school in Sacramento. Clara Wilson was perhaps 20, with a pretty face and elaborate coiffure clearly meant to impress. She batted her eyelashes at Vincent. Mother's told me so much about you, Mr. Evans. I understand you have the finest ranch in the territory. Mrs. Wilson exaggerates, Vincent replied politely. Miss Wilson, welcome back to Yerington. Have you met Miss Davies? She's reopening her uncle's millinery. Clara gave Penelope a dismissive glance. How? Industrious. Though I've grown accustomed to Sacramento fashions, I doubt local styles would appeal to me now. Perhaps you'll be pleasantly surprised, Vincent said, his tone cooling noticeably. Miss Davies comes directly from Boston, where she managed one of the city's finest establishments. Martha's lips thinned. Well, we should circulate. Clara, Mrs. Henderson was asking about your experiences in Sacramento. We should speak with her. As they walked away, Penelope couldn't suppress a small laugh. I don't think Mrs. Wilson approves of your choice of companion for the social. Mrs. Wilson has been trying to interest me in eligible young ladies for years, Vincent said dryly. I've disappointed her repeatedly. And yet here you are, disappointing her again by escorting a spinster milliner of advanced age, Penelope teased, surprising herself with the boldness. Vincent's eyes crinkled at the corners. I prefer to think of it as demonstrating superior judgment. His expression grew more serious. Age is merely a number, Penelope. It's experience that shapes us, teaches us what truly matters. The use of her first name sent a small thrill through her. And what truly matters, Vincent? His gaze held her steadily. Honesty, courage, kindness, the willingness to begin again after loss. He paused. I see all those qualities in you. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities, until they were interrupted by Rebecca approaching with a young man in tow. Miss Davies, Mr. Evans, I'd like to introduce Mr. Howard Phillips, our new schoolteacher. The afternoon continued pleasantly, with Penelope gradually feeling more at ease among the townspeople. Not everyone was as judgmental as Martha Wilson. Many seemed genuinely welcoming, particularly after seeing Vincent's obvious regard for her. As the social wound down, Vincent suggested they take a short drive before returning to town. There's a spot by the river I'd like to show you, if you're not too tired. The location proved to be a peaceful clearing beside the Walker River, where cottonwoods provided dappled shade. Vincent helped Penelope from the buggy and offered his arm as they walked to a grassy spot overlooking the water. I come here sometimes when I need to think, he said quietly. It's peaceful. It's beautiful, Penelope agreed, watching sunlight dance on the rippling water. They stood in companionable silence for several minutes before Vincent spoke again. May I ask what brought you to Yerington? Your uncle mentioned you were well established in Boston. Penelope considered her answer carefully. After my father died, the shop passed to my brother. He has different ideas about its management, and my position became difficult. She looked out over the river, and I found myself increasingly defined by what I wasn't rather than what I was. How do you mean? In Boston society, a woman of 30 without a husband is an object of pity at best, ridicule at worst. Former suitors who once found me charming now looked through me as if I were invisible. Friends with husbands gradually included me less in their lives. She sighed. When my uncle's letter arrived, offering me the shop, it seemed like an opportunity to define myself on my own terms. Vincent's expression was thoughtful. "And how would you define yourself, Penelope Davies?" she smiled. "As a woman who makes exceptional hats, who values independence but not isolation, who believes it's never too late to begin a new chapter." She turned to face him fully. "What about you, Vincent Evans? How do you define yourself?" His blue eyes held a hint of surprise, as if he hadn't expected the question. "As a rancher. A man who's made his share of mistakes, who's learning that grief, while never completely gone, needn't be the only emotion one allows oneself to feel." His voice softened. "A man who, for the first time in 5 years, finds himself looking forward rather than back." The depth of emotion in his words stirred something in Penelope's heart. On impulse, she reached out to touch his hand lightly. "Thank you for bringing me here, and for today." Vincent turned his hand to clasp hers gently. "Thank you for coming to Yerington, Penelope." The ride back to town was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts but comfortable in the shared silence. When they reached her shop, Vincent helped her down from the buggy, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. "May I call on you again?" he asked. "I'd like that," Penelope replied softly. "Good night, then." He hesitated, then leaned forward to brush his lips against her cheek, the briefest touch, but enough to send warmth spreading through her. "Until tomorrow." As Vincent drove away, Penelope touched her fingers to her cheek, feeling strangely young and full of possibility. For the first time since arriving in Yerington, she felt certain she had made the right decision in coming west. The grand reopening of Davies' Millinery on Tuesday exceeded Penelope's expectations. From the moment she unlocked the doors, a steady stream of curious women filed into the shop. Some came genuinely interested in her wares, others merely to assess the woman rumored to have captured Vincent Evans' attention. Rebecca arrived early, purchasing a pale blue bonnet trimmed with silk flowers. "It's perfect for spring, and Father gave me an advance on my allowance as a welcome gift for you." By midday, Penelope had sold 3 ladies' hats and taken orders for 4 more custom pieces, including one for the mayor's wife, a significant endorsement. Even Martha Wilson made an appearance, purchasing a conservative black hat with minimal trimming while making pointed inquiries about Penelope's understanding with Vincent. "There is no formal understanding, Mrs. Wilson," Penelope replied pleasantly. "Mr. Evans and I are simply enjoying each other's company." Martha sniffed disapprovingly. "A man in his position requires a proper wife to manage his household, someone young enough to provide heirs for his ranch." "I'm sure Mr. Evans will make whatever choice he deems appropriate when he's ready," Penelope responded, maintaining her composure while wrapping Martha's purchase. At 4 o'clock, just as the afternoon rush was slowing, Vincent himself appeared at the shop door. He carried a small bouquet of wildflowers and wore an expression that made Penelope's heart skip. "Congratulations," he said, presenting the flowers. "Rebecca tells me it's been a successful opening day." "Very successful," Penelope confirmed, accepting the bouquet with a smile. "Though your arrival has caused a fresh wave of whispers." She nodded toward 2 elderly ladies examining lace trimmings while casting not-so-subtle glances in their direction. Vincent chuckled. "Let them whisper. I've come to invite you to dinner at the hotel restaurant to celebrate your success." "That's very kind, but I couldn't possibly close early on opening day." "Of course not. I meant after you close, say 6 o'clock." Penelope hesitated only briefly. "I'd be delighted." That evening, dressed in her second-best gown, a forest green silk that complemented her hazel eyes, Penelope met Vincent at the Yerington Hotel's small but respectable restaurant. The maitre d' led them to a table by the window, prominently visible to passers-by, a fact Penelope suspected was deliberate on Vincent's part. "You're making quite a statement, dining with me so publicly," she observed as they studied their menus. "Am I?" His expression was innocent, but his eyes held a mischievous glint. "And what statement would that be? That you're not concerned with town gossip, that you're—" She hesitated. "Courting you," Vincent supplied. "Would that be so terrible?" Penelope set down her menu. "Vincent, I'm 30 years old. You can't seriously—" "I'm 36, he interrupted. "Old enough to know my own mind and to recognize what matters." He reached across the table to take her hand. "Penelope, I've spent 5 years existing rather than living. Meeting you has awakened something I thought was gone forever." "We've known each other barely a week," she protested weakly, though her fingers curled around his. "And in that week, I've learned more about you than I know about people I've nodded to for years in this town. I know you're brave enough to leave everything familiar behind to start anew. I know you're skilled at your craft and determined to succeed on your terms. I know your smile transforms your entire face, and that you have a dimple in your left cheek when you truly laugh." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "I know I want to discover much more." Penelope felt herself trembling slightly. "What you're suggesting, it would change everything." "Only if we allow it to," Vincent said gently. "I'm not proposing marriage over soup, Penelope. I'm asking for the chance to know you better, to see where this unexpected connection might lead." Relief mingled with a curious disappointment. "Of course, that's sensible." Vincent's smile suggested he'd caught that flicker of disappointment. "I believe in building solid foundations before raising walls, Penelope. But make no mistake, I intend to build something lasting, if you're willing." Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Vincent would ride into town every few days, timing his visits to coincide with the shop's closing hour. Sometimes they would dine at the hotel. Other times enjoy picnic suppers by the river or on the small porch behind Penelope's shop. On Sundays, he escorted her to church services and social gatherings, his attention unwavering despite Martha Wilson's increasingly obvious attempts to promote her daughter's charms. As April turned to May, Penelope's business flourished. Women from surrounding ranches and neighboring communities began making special trips to Yerington for her creations. She hired Rebecca part-time to help with the shop, freeing more time for custom work, and though she wouldn't admit it aloud, for Vincent's visits. Through their conversations, Penelope learned the full story of Vincent's past. How he had come west at 21 with dreams of owning land. How he'd worked ranch jobs, lived frugally, and eventually saved enough for a small plot north of Yerington. How he'd met Caroline Turner at a church social much like the one they'd attended, courted her properly, and married her after a year. "We were happy," Vincent told her one evening as they walked along the river path. "Not in the breathless, romantic way young people imagine love, but in a steady, comfortable way. We were building something together." "You must have loved her very much," Penelope said softly. "I did." Vincent's face grew solemn. "When she told me she was expecting, it seemed like everything I'd worked for was coming together perfectly." He stopped walking, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "I was in Carson City finalizing a cattle sale when the messenger found me. By the time I got home, they were both gone, Caroline and our son." Penelope's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry, Vincent. For a long time, I blamed myself. If I'd been home, if I'd gotten the doctor sooner." He shook his head. "Your uncle helped me see that some things are beyond our control. That Caroline wouldn't want me to stop living because she had. He was a wise man, my uncle. He was." Vincent turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Penelope, I need you to understand something. What I feel for you doesn't diminish what I felt for Caroline. But neither is it a replacement or a comparison. It's entirely new, entirely its own." "I understand," Penelope whispered, and she did. What was growing between them wasn't competing with the past, it was building toward a future. That night, standing at her door, Vincent kissed her properly for the first time, a gentle meeting of lips that deepened slowly, his arms drawing her close as hers circled his neck. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Penelope knew with certainty that she had found something she'd never expected to find in Yerington, Nevada, or anywhere else. By early June, Penelope and Vincent's courtship was the established talk of the town. Some approved Sheriff Collins had taken to winking whenever he saw them together, and Rebecca delighted in every development. Others, led by Martha Wilson, maintained disapproving whispers about the inappropriate match, and poor Caroline barely cold in her grave, though it had been 5 years. Vincent seemed impervious to the gossip, his attention to Penelope growing more devoted with each passing week. He had taken to bringing her small, thoughtful gifts, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, a brooch shaped like a thimble he'd found in Carson City, wildflowers gathered on his ride to town. For Penelope, whose pragmatic nature had always outweighed romantic inclinations, the experience was transformative. She found herself humming as she worked, watching the road for the sight of his horse, storing up observations and stories to share when they were together. On a warm Saturday in mid-June, Vincent invited her to visit his ranch for the first time. "Nothing formal," he assured her. "Just a picnic lunch and a chance to show you what I've been building these past years." Rebecca, who had become a trusted friend, helped Penelope prepare for the outing. "You'll need a sturdier hat than your usual, the sun is fierce away from town," she advised, selecting a wide-brimmed straw hat from the shop's inventory. "And perhaps the blue walking dress. It's practical but becoming." When Vincent arrived with his buggy at 10 o'clock, Penelope was ready, her anticipation barely contained. The drive north from Yerington took them through increasingly open country sagebrush plains, giving way to greener pastures as they approached the Walker River. The Evans ranch house came into view as they crested a small rise, a substantial 2-story structure of weathered wood with a wide front porch. Outbuildings clustered nearby, and in the distance, cattle grazed on green spring grass. "It's beautiful," Penelope said sincerely as Vincent helped her from the buggy. "It's home," he replied simply. "Would you like a tour of the house first, or shall we ride out to see some of the property?" "The house, please. I'm curious to see where you live." Vincent led her up the porch steps, opening the front door with a hint of self-consciousness. "I should warn you, it's a bachelor's home, functional rather than fashionable." The interior was indeed plain but surprisingly comfortable. The main floor held a spacious kitchen with a large wooden table, a formal dining room used mainly for storage, from the look of it, and a comfortably furnished sitting room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves along one wall. "You're a reader," Penelope observed with delight, examining the well-worn volumes. "Winter evenings are long," Vincent explained. "Books are good company." Upstairs were 4 bedrooms, Vincent's Spartan but tidy quarters, a slightly smaller room he used as an office, and 2 unused rooms with furniture shrouded in dust covers. Standing in the hallway after the tour, Vincent seemed hesitant. "It needs a woman's touch," he admitted. "I've maintained it, but not much more." "It's a lovely home, Vincent, solid and well-built with good bones," Penelope smiled. "Like its owner." His answering smile eased the tension. "I packed a lunch, thought we might ride out to the North Ridge. There's a view of the entire valley from there." They spent the afternoon exploring the ranch on horseback, Vincent proudly showing her improvements. He'd made irrigation systems for the pastures, breeding pens for the prime stock, a new barn built just the previous year. Everywhere they went, ranch hands tipped their hats respectfully, their curious glances suggesting Vincent rarely brought visitors. At the North Ridge, they spread a blanket in the shade of a lone pine tree and unpacked the lunch Vincent's cook had prepared: cold chicken, biscuits, apple pie, and a bottle of lemonade. "Your ranch is impressive," Penelope said as they ate. "You've built something remarkable here." "It's been my focus for so long," Vincent acknowledged. "Perhaps too much so. It gave you purpose when you needed it." "Yes, but a man needs more than work to sustain him." Vincent's expression grew serious. "Penelope, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Her heart quickened. "Yes." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I've been carrying this for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. I think this is it." He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a single diamond flanked by 2 smaller sapphires. "This was my grandmother's. I'd be honored if you would wear it as my wife." Though she had begun to expect this moment, the reality of it still left Penelope breathless. "Vincent." He took her hand. "I know it hasn't been long, but at our age, we recognize what matters when we find it. You've brought light back into my life, Penelope. I want to build a future with you here at the ranch or in town if you prefer. We can make any arrangement work as long as we're together." "People will talk," she said weakly. "Martha Wilson will be scandalized." Vincent laughed. "Let her be. We answer to our own hearts, not town gossip. My business can continue exactly as it is, or move to the ranch, or any combination that makes you happy." He squeezed her hand. "I'm not asking you to give up your independence, Penelope. I'm asking to share your life." Tears pricked at Penelope's eyes as the full impact of the moment washed over her. At 30, after years of believing her chance at love had passed, this good, honorable man was offering her a future she'd never dared to imagine. "Yes," she whispered, then more firmly, "Yes, Vincent Evans, I will marry you." His smile illuminated his entire face as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if meant for her all along. Vincent drew her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the emotions words couldn't express: joy, tenderness, promise. When they returned to town that evening, Penelope wearing Vincent's ring and a radiance that had nothing to do with the setting sun, Rebecca was waiting anxiously at the shop. "Well?" she demanded the moment they stepped inside. "Did he ask? Did you say yes? Let me see the ring." Penelope laughed, extending her hand for inspection. "Yes to all your questions." Rebecca squealed with delight, hugging Penelope tightly before including Vincent in her embrace. "I knew it. From the very first day, I told Father there was something special happening between you two." News of their engagement spread through Yerington with predictable speed. Most reactions were congratulatory, though Martha Wilson made a point of expressing concern about the hasty nature of their attachment and the practical difficulties of their age difference, particularly when Vincent mentioned their plan to start a family if blessed with children. "At your age, Miss Davies, childbearing carries significant risks," Martha warned during an unwelcome visit to the millinery. "And even if you should manage it, you'd be nearly 50 by the time the child finished school. Have you considered how that might affect an impressionable young person?" "I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Wilson," Penelope replied evenly, "but Vincent and I have discussed these matters privately. We're well aware of the possibilities and limitations." In truth, they had spoken frankly about children. Vincent had expressed hope for a family, but assured Penelope that her companionship was his primary desire. "If we're blessed with children, wonderful. If not, We'll have each other and plenty of ranch children who could use caring adults in their lives. They planned a September wedding, a small ceremony at the church, followed by a celebration at the ranch. Throughout the summer, Penelope divided her time between the thriving shop and preparations for married life. Vincent added a dedicated workspace to one of the unused bedrooms at the ranch, complete with storage for hat-making supplies and large windows for natural light. You can create here when you wish, maintain the shop in town when you prefer, he explained. The buggy will always be at your disposal, or I can drive you myself. As their wedding day approached, Penelope found herself reflecting on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. Less than a year ago, she had been a spinster shopkeeper in Boston, defined by what society perceived as her failures. Now she was a successful businesswoman preparing to marry a man who valued her precisely as she was 30 years old, independent, and in what he continued to call the prime of her beauty. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect. Rebecca, serving as maid of honor, helped Penelope dress in the cream-colored silk gown they had ordered from San Francisco. It was elegant without being ostentatious, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs and a modest train. "You're the most beautiful bride I've ever seen," Rebecca declared, adjusting the simple veil. "Wait until Vincent sees you." The small church was filled with well-wishers when Sheriff Collins escorted Penelope down the aisle. He had offered to give her away, explaining gruffly that Samuel would have wanted someone to do the honors proper. At the altar, Vincent waited in a new black suit, his blue eyes widening as he saw his bride. The love in his gaze was unmistakable, a tangible thing that seemed to fill the space between them. Reverend Porter conducted the ceremony with warmth and sincerity. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent's kiss was tender, but profound, a promise of all that was to come. The celebration at the ranch continued well into the evening, with townspeople and neighboring ranchers joining in the festivities. Even Martha Wilson attended, though she maintained a pinched expression throughout and departed early. As twilight fell and the last guests prepared to leave, Vincent found Penelope sitting on the porch swing, watching the first stars appear. "Happy, Mrs. Evans?" he asked, settling beside her. "Completely, Mr. Evans." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Though I'm still getting used to the name. You have a lifetime to practice." He put his arm around her, drawing her close. "A lifetime that begins properly tonight." Later, in the privacy of their bedroom, freshly painted and furnished with items both old and new, a perfect blend of their separate lives becoming one, Penelope discovered the final truth of Vincent's words that first day. At 30, she was indeed in her prime, not just of beauty, but of passion, of courage, of the capacity to love and be loved completely. Their life together unfolded with the changing seasons, each day bringing new discoveries and deepening bonds. Penelope maintained her shop in town, riding in with Vincent when his business took him to Yerington, staying at the ranch to work in her custom-built studio when she preferred. The arrangement raised eyebrows among traditionalists, but gradually became accepted as simply the Evans way. By their first anniversary, Penelope had trained Rebecca to manage the shop several days a week, freeing more time for life at the ranch. She had grown to love the rhythm of ranch life, the pre-dawn quiet as Vincent rose to begin his day, the satisfaction of shared meals after honest work, the peaceful evenings spent reading aloud by the fire or simply sitting together on the porch, watching the vast sky fill with stars. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Penelope discovered she was expecting a child. Though initially concerned about the risks at her age, their joy outweighed their fears. "We'll take every precaution," Vincent promised, already making arrangements for the best doctor from Carson City to attend her. Throughout her pregnancy, Penelope bloomed with health and contentment. She continued working at a moderated pace, switching to designing patterns rather than constructing hats as her condition advanced. Vincent was attentive without being overprotective, trusting her to know her limits while ensuring she had whatever support she needed. On a snowy January morning in 1879, with Vincent steadfastly at her side throughout her labor, Penelope gave birth to a healthy son they named Samuel Vincent Evans, after her uncle and his father. Holding their child between them, tears of joy streaming down both their faces, Penelope and Vincent shared a look of wonder and gratitude. "Thank you," Vincent whispered, kissing her forehead, "for coming to Yerington, for giving me a second chance at happiness, for our son." "Thank you for seeing me," Penelope replied softly. "Not as others did, but as I truly was in my prime and ready for all this joy." 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Caroline Rebecca Evans, completing their family. As the children grew, the Evans Ranch thrived and expanded, becoming known throughout the territory not only for its fine cattle, but for the generous hospitality of its owners. Penelope's hat shop, eventually managed entirely by Rebecca, who had finally convinced her father to let her prove her business acumen, remained a Yerington institution for decades. Though Penelope still created special designs for loyal customers, her focus shifted to family and community, establishing Yerington's first lending library, organizing support for ranch families during hard times, and mentoring young women seeking their own independence. On warm summer evenings, Vincent and Penelope could often be found on their porch swing, watching their children play in the yard or, in later years, discussing their adventures away at school. Sometimes they would reminisce about their beginning, the skepticism they had faced, the obstacles overcome, the happiness they had built together. "You ever regret it?" Vincent asked once, as they celebrated 20 years together. "Leaving Boston, marrying an old rancher with set ways. Taking such a chance at 30, Penelope's laugh, still musical at 50, drifted across the twilight air. "Never for a moment. Martha Wilson did me the greatest favor of my life when she mocked my age that day." "How so?" Vincent's arm tightened around her shoulders. "Because it gave a certain stubborn cowboy the opportunity to tell me I was in my prime." She turned to kiss him, still finding the same thrill in his touch after all their years together. And every day since has proven how right he was. In Yerington, Nevada, long after the original residents had passed on, people still told the story of Penelope Davies and Vincent Evans, the spinster milliner and the widowed rancher who found love when neither was looking, who built a remarkable life together despite the whispers, and who proved that sometimes life's greatest adventures begin at 30.